Okay. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma fahimna asrara kitabik wa wafiqna na'mal bihi. Allahumma asrara kitabik wa haqqa al-yaqeen. Waj'alna min qism al-ula min hadhihi thalatha aqsam. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, brothers. Asatiz al-Kiram, Ustadh Sohaib and Ustadh Ahmet. We have a heavy weight on our shoulders, inshallah, but I look forward to the discussion. Maybe we'll start with the recitation. So today our plan is we're going to be covering, although we had said the first 2 pages, but a lot of the asatiz that have been contributing, myself included, we find that the mufassirs are very heavy and they explain a lot, and it's very difficult to capture 2 pages, but we are speedy. So we're going to go through the first page of the Qur'an, of Surah Baqarah, yani after the first 5 verses. That would be from verses, I believe, from verses 6 to 12, 6 to 16 inclusive, inshallah. And we spoke mainly about the 5 attributes of the believers last week. And today we're going to have 2 verses about the attributes of the disbelievers, and then the rest about the hypocrites. Whose beautiful voice are we going to hear?
I think it's your turn now, sir.
Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الذين كفروا سواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون. ختم الله على قلوبهم وعلى سمعهم وعلى أبصارهم غشاوة ولهم عذاب عظيم. ومن الناس من يقول آمنا بالله وباليوم الآخر وما هم بمؤمنين. يخادعون الله والذين آمنوا وما يخدعون إلا أنفسهم وما يشعرون. في قلوبهم مرض فزادهم الله مرضا ولهم عذاب أليم بما كانوا يكذبون. صدق الله العظيم. Ustadh Sohaib, maybe you can start us off with some of the Arabic of the verses, inshallah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inshallah, if we can share screen, I will show the translation of these ayat, and then we'll focus particularly on the first of these ayahs. If we could just pull up the share screen, please. So, inshallah, to make this a bit easier to see.
I like your title, Assured Translation.
Yes, so as we've said before, this is based on the tafsir of Imam Ibn Ashur. And like in all things, I prefer to have fun wherever possible. And in this case, of course, it is assured and high quality translation, inshallah. And it's mainly assured by the fact that it is coming from a mufassir. I don't know if it's possible to reduce my volume there because the echo is quite a lot. At least I'm hearing it that way. Or I'll have to mute. I'll have to mute the volume so I don't hear you.
We make some changes. Yeah.
This translation is based on the tafsir of Ibn Ashur. So the things that you see in bold here are the things that are more directly words from the ayah, so the parts that you would normally see in a translation. And the parts that are not in bold are the things that you would typically find in between brackets that are a kind of elaboration. And these are coming from what is implied by the text and what Imam Ibn Ashur himself is saying that we should understand. So wherever possible, in this translation, which is a work in progress, and our flagship project at Ibn Ashur Center, we try to use the space of the translation to do as much of the work as possible. And then what is needed beyond that, we will create obviously some footnotes and so on. And we've shared this kind of draft form with you in the notes, which I think will be uploaded very shortly, inshallah. So as for those who reject faith, it is the same for them whether you warn them or not, they will not believe. That would be the straightforward translation. And then if we try to elaborate on the meaning a little bit, as for those idolaters, because Ibn Ashur is telling us here that the first category who are being talked about here are not, for example, from the people of the book, but it is that category of people who are the known quantity of the idol worshippers, the mushrikun of Mecca in particular. But also, necessarily, this statement cannot be taken as an absolute and as a universal. And many translations that you'd read could give this impression that anyone who is an unbeliever will never be a believer. But because we know, even without having to think about it too much, that this simply cannot be true, because there are plenty of people who are kafir in the weaker sense, that is to say, they are not Muslims, they're not mu'mins, right? So they don't believe. Then one day, Allah opens their heart and guides them. They become convinced of the truth and they become Muslims. So one cannot say that it applies to all unbelievers, right? So if we look in the tafsirs, we will find they will tell us that it is, for example, a specific group, like the leaders, or particular names they will even give for those who are intended by this ayah, so that the Prophet ﷺ would know that there are certain people who will never benefit from the warnings and from the guidance that you're delivering to them. Of course, that doesn't mean then that there's no point in doing the warning, but there are certain people who will never benefit. And this is contrasted then with Hudan lil Muttaqeen, as we saw earlier, that there are a certain type of people who we translated this as people of vigilance. The Muttaqeen, those who have the basic characteristics that would allow them to benefit from the guidance, right? And become then people of taqwa in the fuller sense, who have imbibed all the qualities, the culmination of the attributes of faith, right? So in contrast to that, there are those who will never benefit. So it is the same for them whether you warn them or not. And here in this translation, we're trying to make this kind of different you, because we talked before about you and yous and you too. We're trying to signify that in some way to make it easier to be able to distinguish when you are looking at the more expanded form of the translation. So it is the same for them whether you warn them or not, they will not believe. So I'll pause there in terms of the translation, and we can talk more about some of the meanings.
النقل is more important than the aql. So تفضل أستاذ أحمد.
Yeah, it's interesting, Ustadh. Sohaib, you mentioned that these kind of verses are usually about a specific group of people. Remember how Ustadh Sadeq were talking about this in our Quranic moments? These kind of verses, they may be understood as if, okay, it's a blanket, statement for all the disbelievers. But for these people, Ibn Kathir talks about another verse. It says, even if the verse is from Surah Yunus, verse number 97. It says, even if every sign were to come to them until they see the painful punishment. And the verse is that, like, it doesn't say what, it doesn't make the kind of link, but these are the kind of people, like, despite all the signs that come to them, they're closed to the warning and until they see the punishment. But what's perhaps interesting here is that he gives a narration from Ibn Abbas radiallahu anh, where he says he was keen that all people believe and follow his guidance. So this verse is also talking about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's grievance over the fact that these people do not believe. And that's actually confirmed by the last part, which says, la yu'minun. So let's say if we just say inna alladhina kafaru sawa'un alayhim anzartum am lam tunzirhum, this could be a complete sentence, right? But then it adds la yu'minun at the end, which really confirms that they don't believe and they're not going to believe as well. So and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is sad over it, and in a way it's showing and perhaps consoling the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well, because these are the people who Ibn Kathir says they've covered the truth and did not believe in what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had brought to them. So,
yeah, like you said, like consoling. Imam Baqai says the same thing, that tasalli. It's like a tasalli for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's as if the verse is answering the question, what will the state of the disbelievers be now that we've heard the state of the believers? Imam Baqai, rahmatullah alayhi, he says, after going through the disbelievers, he says the next verses are going to speak about the disbelievers. But then he said the disbelievers are divided into two. So he sees the munafiqs as disbelievers, but he just says that the first two verses will speak about those musarihina, those who explicitly show and articulate their disbelief, whereas the 12 verses, the second type of disbelievers, he says, are those who, the hypocrites, those who are from the believers and the Bani Israel, he says there. Just like Ustadh Sohaib said, that alladhina kafaru, there the alladhina, some have said that it's for ahad, for like a specific group. Some have said it could have referred to some leaders of the Quraysh, like Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab. And if that's the case, then this verse is almost like a bit of a ikhbar an min al-ghayb, news from the unseen, where it's saying that they're going to die, just like Surah Lahab. Tabbat yada Abi Lahab is like saying no matter what happens, they'll die as unbelievers. Allahu alam. But if not, then it could just refer to the whole thing. Whereas for believers, it says yu'minun, alladhina yu'minuna bil ghayb. The mudari is used to show that the importance of the constantly renewing the faith.
When it comes to believers,
when it comes to disbelievers, the past tense is used to sort of, the hearer gets even scared a bit, because even an instant of kufr, you want to even stay away from an instant of kufr. Kafaru, like they committed kufr. It could be kufr in Allah or even kufr ni'mah. So it's more, there's more tarheeb in it, a warning. Allah.
But there is present tense used at the end. La yu'minun.
Well, the present tense last at the end. I think Ibn Ashur would have a lot to say, but Imam Baqai has this strange rule, not a strange rule, but let me see what it says. He says something like when the la is brought next to the mudari in context like this, the meaning is fil mustaqbal. Yani they will not believe in the future. So,
okay.
Yeah, I think it's the next verse. Allahu Alam. I'll look at my notes again. Yeah, I don't know if Ustadh Sohaib has anything on that, about the la yu'minun.
Well, yeah, but we did that in the translation.
Did you? Sorry.
Yeah.
Madiratan.
So everything in the translation that you see is reflective of having absorbed the things that he said. So if we understand it as will not believe.
That last bit.
Everything in the translation that I showed you is based on the tafsir that he's given. So we don't have to necessarily explain every grammar point. Except that it's reflected then in what you see when it said they will not believe. It wouldn't make any sense.
They will not believe. Okay.
Yeah. It wouldn't make any sense to say those who disbelieved do not believe.
True. Yeah. Okay, sorry, I forgot the wording of the translation. That's why. So you mentioned it. Imam Baqai goes on to give the list of names. I was surprised. He's quoting many Ibn Hisham and Ibn Ishaq, but when we think of, if you have to think of the top of your mind, how many names of munafiqs can you think of? I mean, I know we're talking about the kuffari, but I can think of one or two, like Abdullah bin Ubay ibn Salul, and he started going through names and names. SubhanAllah, Allahu Alam.
So obviously, then it's important to think about this phenomenon of the hypocrites, right? So here in Medina, where Surah al-Baqarah is being revealed, the phenomenon of hypocrisy is one of the important problems that the Prophet ﷺ is dealing with. This is a problem that didn't exist in Mecca, where the Muslims are under oppression, where they are under pressure, where it's a big cost. There's a big cost involved in choosing to be a believer and to be with the Prophet ﷺ. So no one would do that seeking some self-interest, except the interest of the hereafter. Whereas in Medina, there were a few interests involved beyond, what was the pursuit of the sincere believers. There were those who simply saw that there was a shift in the power dynamics, and so they said, we will just go with the flow here without being convinced. And maybe even such people who have a kind of weak iman, it can grow in time and they can come into the fullness of belief. But then there are other people who were leaders in some sense, like Abdullah ibn Ubay, as you mentioned. They had a place in the city of Yathrib at the time. They were therefore quite aggrieved when things just turned against their plans and expectations. And so those of them who then saw the Prophet ﷺ as some kind of rival, they had their own faction. And these leaders are then the ones who are referred to as the shayateen in the ayah after this, that they are the devils and like the leaders of hypocrisy. And many of the ayat which talk about the hypocrites are referring to this category among them. So there are like the uber hypocrites, and then there are those who are like of different levels below that. Even there are some who might still be considered among the believers, but have some leanings and some connections with the hypocrites. So a lot of the ayat which talk about the phenomenon of hypocrisy are warning the believers about the hypocrites, so that they recognize that this exists, this is happening. You have to be careful about their plots. You have to be aware that some of them are infiltrators who are deliberately trying to undermine the mission of Islam, the message of the Prophet ﷺ, and to undermine weaken the resolve of the believers. And this is going to be a matter of life and death, because when it comes to Uhud, for example, how the hypocrites then played out their plot, that put lives at risk. And then finally, when some of the believers obviously made their fatal error to go down from the mountain, they were not hypocrites. But what happens here is, the sort of messaging that comes from these people weakens that sense of obedience and adherence to the word of the Prophet ﷺ. So this is why the problem of hypocrisy is so predominant in certain surahs of the Quran. Here, in the beginning of al-Baqarah, as we've noted, the mention of the outward known kafirs is just in these two verses, and then we come to the expansion and the issue of the hypocrites, which inshallah we will see in the translation in a moment. But in a way, the open enemy is less of a danger than the hidden enemy and the enemy within. The external enemy is easier to deal with than the inner enemy. And the shayateen, by the way, as well, is again here refers to the fact that even the shaitan, the devil, from the spirit world, is a more dangerous enemy than the external enemy, right? Because again, facing someone on the battle, Imam al-Razi says something like this: a person who is a shaheed, someone who is killed on the battlefield against the external enemy, is a shaheed and is a martyr, is raised in high rank. But someone who is defeated and killed spiritually by the devil, such a person is then in a state of condemnation and rejection. So the internal enemy is more dangerous than the external enemy. And that is reflected then in this brief mention of the unbelievers versus the extensive discussion of the hypocrites.
Yeah, I have a poem here from Imam Khattabi talking about the hypocrites. تحرز من الجهال جهدك إنهم وإن أظهروا فيك المودة أعداء وإن كان فيهم من يسرك فعله فكل لذيذ طعم أو جله داء. You know, be careful as much as you can from the ignorant people, even if they display some sort of love, for they are your enemies. Even if it pleases you, their actions, because anything that's sweet in taste, whether all of it or most of it, it's still a poison or a sickness. I just want to mention here in terms of munasabat, Imam Baqai obviously says from going from, and I like to start Sohaib's point about the Quran's talking about the leader of the hypocrites, particularly in these verses. I think in Surah Tawbah and others, it starts talking about the nuanced other categories, but we have to keep in mind that these are really the leaders. And same with the kuffar as well. Sometimes Muslims, we can read these verses and automatically assume, okay, anyone that's a non-Muslim, khatama Allahu ala qulub. It doesn't really apply like that. It's the leaders or those most determined, as the translation said. Here, another tafsir talks about how usually after tarheeb, after encouraging Muslims to have these attributes, tarheeb comes, warning them. Here in Isharatul Ijaz, Ustadh Saeed Nursi rahmatullah, he talks about Jamal and Jalal. That's another thing that Imam Baqai also goes in. That after we've had these 5 verses of Jamali, and then he talks about this Jamal and Jalal in different levels, and he says Allah's names and attributes in the level of his sifat al-af'al, Jamal and Jalal can be distributed as lutuf and qahr, or husn and hayba. At the level of actions, it can be split into tahliya and takhliya, yani beautifying and becoming emptying, tazyin or tanzih. At the level of athar wa a'mal, actions of servants, and in the more physical world that we see around us, and what it leads to into the hereafter, it's either Jannat or light or Qahar and Jahannam. In the level of zikr, and in the world of zikr, alam is zikr, one is hamd. Hamd is in response to Jamali, and tasbih is in response to Jalali. At the level of kalam, speaking, in the world of speaking, alam, Jamal is the amr, and the Jalali, the attributes of power, is reflected with the nawahi, nahi. And in the level of the word of guidance, one is targhib, encouragement, and one is tarhib, sort of frightening or warning. And the level of wijdan, in the conscience of the human being, one is raja, hope, and one is khawf, fear. And it just continues going on. And when it goes to the point is that the person is never fully ma'yus, totally in despair of Allah's rahmah, nor are they totally feeling safe from Allah's punishment, that balance. But he sort of split it up into all these different levels. So he's saying it's a Quranic methodology to always follow the targhib with tarhib, or the other way around. Here we have targhib with the 5 attributes of the believers. Now we're in the level of the unbelievers. Should we, Ustadh Ahmed, do you want to mention? Should we move on to verse number 7?
Yeah.
Ustadh Sohaib, maybe if you want to take us through the assured translation, please.
Yeah, so if we pull up the shared screen, please. So as for those idolaters who are determined to reject faith, it is the same for them whether you warn them or not, they will not believe. That is because God, due to their rejection, has set a seal on their hearts, so they fail to grasp the truth, and on their hearing, so they fail to hear the warnings. And their eyes are covered, so they fail to see the signs. They will face great torment in this life and the next. So hopefully you can tell the difference between the things that are essential in the ayah's wording and things which are additional and elaboration here based on what Ibn Ashur says about it. So God has set a seal on their hearts. This, raises certain questions theologically as to, what is the cause of what? Is it that God set a seal on their hearts, therefore they don't believe? Is it because, they don't believe, therefore God has set a seal on their hearts? And looking at the discussions of this, I feel that it is hard to just simply take a definite stance either way. Now, on a purely theological basis, God is the creator of all things. Everything happens by his decree. Therefore, it is God's action that results in the other things and not the other way around. But, the scholars of Ahl Sunnah distinguish between the fact that God creates and the fact that a person's actions are by the taqdeer of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they are fi'lul abd. Still, the person has their action that they do. This is sometimes described as kasb, that is to say the acquisition or the earning of the deeds that they do. So there's also this other angle to look at the thing, which is your choices and how those things have an effect on what becomes your destiny, right? Because then the expression of God setting a seal on their hearts wasn't to prevent them ever hearing the truth, because then he sent them the truth. He sent them the book. He sent them the warner and the messenger. So Ibn Ashur also explains this whole thing as being a description of how they have ended up. Their state is such that they have seals on their hearts. And who is the one who creates all? So that's why, in a way, the translation reflects both directions. That is because God, due to their rejection, has set a seal in their hearts and on their hearing, and their eyes are covered. So this prevents them from understanding, because the heart is the seat of reasoning within the Quranic expression. And on their hearing, because hearing is necessary to hear the Quran and to recognize the warning. And their eyes are covered because the sight is where you would see the signs in creation around you. They're prevented from reflecting on those as well. And they will face great torment. The obvious thing is this would refer to the hereafter, but it may also refer to what is going to happen within this life when they have, when things reach their culmination between the Muslims and the mushrikeen, and then the munafiqs will, be exposed as to which side they are on. Some of them are allied with the mushrikeen. Some of them are allied with the people of the book, particularly the Jews of Medina. So there were those who claimed to have entered in. So I'm maybe confusing things, because I'm talking here about in the ladina kafaru, and then we're going to have the discussion about the munafiqeen. So this ayah is not about the munafiqeen as such, but it will apply then to the munafiqeen, because those who are mentioned in the next ayah are a category of these who also make out that they are believers, right? So, but at this point in the ayahs that we are reading here, 6 and 7, we're talking about those who, in general, who are the unbelievers. So this is there's a subtlety here which is perhaps worth mentioning. Why is there a plural word for the hearts? Ala qulubihim, and then later on wa ala absarihim ghishawa, whereas we have a singular word for wa ala sam'ihim, which is a singular. We don't have in the Quran anywhere wa ala asma'ihim. So one could have a sort of simple grammatical kind of reason for that, which is that the sama' refers to the faculty of hearing and not to the ears, whereas absar is referring to the eyes. There is this explanation, but there's a possible deeper explanation, which is they all had the same hearing, right? Everybody heard the Quran the same. The Quran was being delivered to them all the same, and they are blocked from that. Whereas when it comes to sight and when it comes to heart, there are different levels. There are those who are actually they have more insight and more ability to recognize the signs around them in creation. And there are those who have hearts that are also more, they have a greater ability to ponder on whatever they hear and see. So hearing is also mentioned before sight because it's more important in the sense, hearing the Quran is prioritized and even more important to mention than seeing the signs in creation. So these are some subtleties that he points to, which otherwise you wouldn't catch from the translation. So I'm pausing here. Yeah.
You talked about kasb, Ustad, the accusation, where the person, and this is what Mujahid says, he says the sins are upon the heart and envelop it until they overwhelm it. And there is a hadith, various hadith that talks about this, where every sin is a black dot in the heart, and finally the heart gets covered in black, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala seals that heart. And there's, I guess, different things which Ibn Kathir has covered here when it comes to those things which seal the heart. In one case, he talks about the arrogance, like Ibn Jarir. He quotes Ibn Jarir and says that the arrogance makes them deaf and turn away. So, especially in the case of leadership, where they feel either they're too good for the message, or they don't want to give up what they have, or they just don't want to be associated with the believers, whom at the start were really the weak ones, the slaves, the destitute. We know that they would say to the Prophet ﷺ, like, if you tell them to move away, then we'll come and talk. Like, we can't sit with these people. But Zamakhshari, for example, he also calls Zamakhshari as well. He says that he sealed their hearts and prevented them from guidance as a punishment for their persistence in falsehood and their abandonment of the truth. And he says this is a justice from God. So again, going back to what you said, Ustadh Sohaib, this accusation, what the servant does. I had a problem when I was younger with, especially when you just open up the Quran and start reading in translation, and you're like, Allah seals their hearts, like has that justice, and has that a merciful God, etc. But then when from Surah stuff, it says فَلَمَّا زَاغُوا أَزَاغَ اللَّهُ قُلُوبَهُم, right? So, and when they persistently deviated, then Allah caused their heart to deviate. And so it's I guess Ibn Kathir really focuses on that with this verse.
Allahu Alam, it's like the Hadith Qudsi, when someone takes a step towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah takes 2 steps towards him. Just like this is the case in Hidayah, in terms of them being granted misguidance, they take the step, they make the dua, Allahumma mujib, he rewards them, answers their dua. Yeah, that verse always sticks to my mind. فَلَمَّا زَاغُوا أَزَاغَ اللَّهُ قُلُوبَهُم. In many places, they even says, بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْذِبُونَ, always pointing to the reason what they used to do beforehand. And like Ustadh Sohaib said, like the Ahl Sunnah takes sort of the middle position. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't punish. His punishment and rewarding is not abath, hasha. There's wisdom to it, so there is some responsibility for the servants, but in terms of pure tawheed, humans' actions don't have any real effects, and so the people of i'tizal are also not correct when they say humans are the creators of their actions. And yeah, this verse, there's a lot of theological things around it because of this. In terms of munasabah, the Imam Baqai is saying that after the previous verse mentions that it's equal whether you warn them or warn them not, this verse goes actually to the reason why is it that whether you warn them or not, they do not believe. It says that it's because they really don't have the intellect, and the verse actually puts them at the level of animals, but even lower than animals, because a human being, even if they lack intelligence, if they hear and they see, they can find guidance. But these people, the verse is saying that the hearts are sealed, they cannot comprehend what they're hearing, and they're not seeing, they cannot see. And then in terms of here, Imam Baqai focuses on the ordering. He says that the ordering in this verse is the context in short is there to show that the heart is sealed first, because I think it's talking about how the main topic is faith, and then the ease. And then in another verse of the Quran in Surah Jathiyah, وَأَضَلَّهُمُ اللَّهُ, if I'm not mistaken, Allah, فَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ هَوَاهُ إِلَهُ هَوَاهُ. Have you seen the one who takes his desires as his God? So Allah has misguided him ala ilmin, and he has put a seal. And in that verse it says Allah has left them astray, knowingly sealed their hearing and hearts, and placed a cover on their sight. That one, the hearing comes first. But yeah, I've also noticed that the Quran, if I'm not mistaken, nearly all the time mentions hearing in singular, but also mentions it first before basar, like you mentioned. Some of the opinions provided here of Imam Baqai is that he's saying very little is there a difference between the hearing. It's always like a singular thing that comes to your mind. That's one giving. His teacher Harali mentions that the sealing of the heart and the ears have been mentioned together because you can't hear what you don't understand. He's almost saying sami'a like istami'a, listening, where listening implies some sort of understanding. Other opinions that I've heard, Allah Alam, is that the masmu'at, the hearing, also Quran and Wahi tends to address the hearing more, because ad-da'i ilallah, the one who calls to Allah, you hear him, as opposed to seeing the. And so there are other reasons where the hearing refers to Wahi, and the mabsurat, the mubsirat that you see around you. Sometimes that's more of a reason for people's misguidance, hence mentioned third, Allahu Alam.
There's the point which Imam al-Razi mentions regarding this this question, as Ustadh Ahmed was pondering on this as well, like what comes first with regards to God's predestination and the action of the servant and going astray, being led astray, etc. And obviously this was a very hot issue in the early times of Islamic theology, and whole sects kind of emerged around this question. And when that happens, of course, you can just talk about how orthodox we are and just how heterodox everyone else is, and that's fine. But it's important to notice then that it is therefore a sensitive issue. It's a tricky issue. And there's a reason why people went astray in that regard, right? If you pardon the expression. So Imam al-Razi actually, and this happens in an ayah in Surah Al-Kahf, he talks about this. I mean, to be honest, he talks about it all through his tafsir, how each ayah, this one has been sometimes taken by the voluntarists, the Qadariyah, in a certain way, and has been taken by the fatalists, the Jabriyah, in a certain way. And he is more on the side of the latter, not on absolute Jabr, that is to say that you have no free will at all, but rather that God is really the creator of everything and you're not the creator of your own actions, as the Mu'tazila claimed. But he talks about that throughout to kind of support how Ahl Sunnah's position is stronger and more based on the evidence than the position of the Mu'tazila, which more emphasized the free will. But one of the interesting things he says about it, which to me is a kind of guiding point as well, in Surah Al-Kahf, he says under verse 57, I'll translate it. It is remarkable that the first phrase in this ayah is used and relied upon by the Qadariyah, the voluntarists, those who believed more in free will, while the latter phrase, until the end of the verse, is relied upon the other side. So I'll quote the ayah. وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنْ ذُكِّرَ بِآيَاتِ رَبِّهِ فَأَعْرَضَ عَنْهَا وَنَسِيَ مَا قَدَّمَتْ يَدَاهُ. So it's to do with his action. And then he says, "Inna ja'alna ala qulubihim akinnatan an yafqahuhu," to the end of the ayah. We've placed, covers and seals over their hearts. So he says we can hardly find in the Quran any verse which appears to be supporting one of these two factions without another verse alongside it for the other faction, even within the same verse. Experience demonstrates the truth of what I am saying, and this is nothing but a tremendous test from Almighty God for his servants, to sort the expert scholars from the blind following pretenders. So he says, ألقاه على عباد ليتميز العلماء الراسخون من المقلدين. So the point that I take from this is, we shouldn't also assume that everything in the Quran is super easy to grasp, but there are things that are inherently difficult to grasp, and this question of what is the role of our free will is one of those questions that will always nag at you as long as you are in this temporal life, I think, right? There might be some people who are very at ease with it, but I think they became at ease with it not through rational means. They became at ease with it through spiritual or even mystical means, which are beyond me. But on purely rational means, you will always have this tension between these propositions, which are both importantly true. One is that God is the creator of all things and knows all things and decides all things. And the other is that we are responsible for our choices, and we are accountable for them. So we can just sort of hand wave that away by saying, well, there's a thing called kasb and acquisition. That to me is just a way of expressing the position that we have to take, which balances these realities, which are inherently, at least in this earthly realm, in a kind of tension. And I think that's what makes life interesting, that you are going you're going to go through life. You cannot say, well, God has sealed my heart, and that's what some of them said later on, وَقَالُوا قُلُوبُنَا غُلْفٌ. They're kind of saying, our hearts are wrapped up and impenetrably wrapped, and we can't hear what you're saying, we can't understand or appreciate what you're saying. Well, but they're not trying. And if they were sincere and they tried to listen, they will hear what will convince them. But if you've decided that you don't want to believe, then God will not guide you, right? So from that perspective, you are responsible for the choices that you make, and then you will be held accountable in the next life.
I think that's a really good reminder, because sometimes, as Muslims, we have an attitude like as if all the verses of the Quran are muhkam and there are no mutashabih. But this is the qadr topic. It's one of the hardest topics ulama have debated. And the Quran, what did they say? Hamal al-awjuh, right? The Quran contains waves and different meanings. So sometimes, yes, we present the Sunni view as if it's the only view, but we've had giants of the Arabic language who are from the Mu'tazila group. They can easily make their argument. So I think that's good to keep that in mind on any topic, that sometimes, our ulama sometimes are influenced in their interpretations by their schools of theology, just like they're influenced by schools of philosophy, the times they live in. And I think that's a really good point. It adds nuance, I think, to our Quranic readings. Just finally, Imam Baqai says that by just quickly mentioning the state of the unbelievers after the believers, it just magnifies the blessing for the believers. And then now we're going into the verses of the hypocrites. Now these verses, obviously Surah Baqarah, 10 years in Medina, but if I'm not mistaken, hypocrites started appearing after the Battle of Badr. أليس كذلك?
I mean, Ibn Kathir talks about like Ubay ibn Salul, and with him he mentions that this hypocrisy started because he was the person who was going to be throned as the as their ruler, as their king. But then when the Prophet arrives, it doesn't go through, and so with that, he starts.
But for example, when did Ubay ibn Salul overtly convert? If I'm not mistaken, it was Allah Alam. I heard after Badr is where hypocrisy really, because before, let's not forget, when the Prophet comes to Medina, there's some 4,000 plus Jews, some 2,000-3,000 mushrik Arabs, and
1,500.
no, 4,000 and a half Jews, 4,500 mushrik Arabs, and the Aus and the Khazraj majority haven't converted, and about 2,000 Muslims. And then slowly, the mushrik Arabs eventually all become Muslims. Yeah. Anyway, Allah Alam. No.
Yeah. Should we look at the?
Naam. Let's have a sip from the assured translation.
Inshallah.
Let us sip. So if we pull up the share screen, please. So after mentioning the category before, it is as if, we can say the translation goes like this. Then there are the sort of people who say, and by the way, these things, they don't come easy, these twists of in the English language. You don't find typically the translation sounds like that. But this is, again, based on Ibn Ashur's way of reading the construction of the ayat. We've talked about a type of people, and then there are the sort of people who say, obviously some translations say, and among mankind there are some who say, but that kind of misses the connection of the ayat, right? So the translation ought to reflect the flow of ideas as well. So then there are the sort of people who say, we believe in God and the last day, though they are by no means believers. They are trying to fool God and those who believe, but they're only fooling themselves without realizing. That's to say, they're only harming themselves with their actions. Their hearts harbor a disease, or their hearts which conceive of these plots harbor a grave spiritual disease and character flaws. God has allowed their disease to grow over time, such that their condition will not improve. An agonizing torment awaits them because of their denial. That is to say, denial of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is on the This is on the reading, بِمَا كَانُوا يُكَذِّبُونَ. Right. So typically, what I do here is I use a different bracket if we're talking about qira'at, right? So بِمَا كَانُوا يُكَذِّبُونَ, which is one of the qira'as here. If we are to follow the reading بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْذِبُونَ, which is the more common one, not the one Ibn Ashur used primarily, then it means because of their lying. So the lying that, obviously they are lying when they claim to be believers. Let me just pull up a few subtleties in the language. So we believe in God and the last day. Why are these two things highlighted? One reason is, and why did they not say we believe in the messenger, right? Which is kind of the point, that we believe in Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Qur'an. No, they say we believe in God and the last day. One reason might have been that they feel a little bit, awkward, and because of the hatred that they have in their hearts towards the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They didn't want to say that, but they'd rather just say we believe in God and the last day. Or it could be that Allah Azza wa Jal is focusing on these two things because they are the basis of everything else. So believing in God is the starting point of all aspects of creed. And belief in the last day is a starting point of all aspect of action and deeds, because when you believe that there is a hereafter, you then have something to work for, to do good deeds, and also to stay away from sinful actions. Right? قالوا آمنا. They say من يقول آمنا, and later on قالوا آمنا. Right? So this is in the past tense. So if you were to be hyper literal, you would translate it as who say we have believed. Right? And there is at least one translation that tries to do this. It's a Sahih International Translation. Uses the past tense for آمنا. I'm not sure if it's here or elsewhere. But that is more about how they, they're expressing a kind of stability for their iman, right? So we have believed and we remain upon belief. وَمَا هُمْ بِمُؤْمِنِينَ, but they are not believers at all, which means that they never have been. They're trying to fool God. يُخَادِعُونَ اللَّهَ. How do they seek to fool Allah? Well, most obviously, they're trying to fool the Prophet ﷺ and the believers who are not fooled. But through that, they are trying to fool God. And mukhada'a has within it, apparently a mutual sense, right? So mukhada'a can be understood as being, in some sense, on both sides. So they are fooling and being fooled at the same time. You don't have to take it that way. You can see it as an action where there's a certain emphasis of how much they are trying and striving to fool God. But maybe, you know, within this is the mutual element. So they are doing this action of trying to fool God. At the same time, God is fooling them and the believers are fooling them. How so? God has them fooled by letting them continue. He lets them go, as it will be said after this, وَيَمُدُّهُمْ فِي طُغْيَانِهِمْ يَعْمَهُونَ. So he is just allowing them to carry on, thinking that they are getting away with it, but their time is coming. And also the believers, I use the word red flags here, you know, this is the current sort of Gen Z term or whatever, right? So all the red flags that they have, the believers are turning a blind eye to them because they've been instructed to just continue to treat these people as believers. And that doesn't mean that they got away with it. It just means that it is not yet the time to deal with them. So وَمَا يَخْدَعُونَ, or the reading that he actually is basing on وَمَا يُخَادِعُونَ إِلَّا أَنفُسَهُم. So in one sense, something is affirmed, they are doing mukhada'a, and then it is denied. They are not doing mukhada'a to Allah and to the believers, but they're only doing mukhada'a to themselves. So here that would mean they're only succeeding in fooling themselves and they're only harming themselves, but they don't even realize that this is what is happening. And so their hearts... yeah, go on.
Sorry. With the mukhada, the first one, yukhadi'un Allah. Here, Imam Baqai says, he quotes his Shaykh al-Harrali, that there's no other reading that's permissible. Are you aware of in that word where instead of yukhadi'una, there's a qira'ah that says yakhda'un?
Only in the second occurrence. Yeah, in the first occurrence, they are agreed.
On the first occurrence, they're all mukhada'a.
يُخَادِعُونَ اللَّهَ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. And then وَمَا يُخَادِعُونَ or وَمَا يَخْدَعُونَ إِلَّا أَنفُسَهُم. There's the two.
There is yukhadi'un in the second one. Okay.
Yeah. But in the first occurrence of the word, the
first one they said from a meaning perspective, it's not permissible to recite it any other way.
Right, because they are not doing khida' in fact to God. But they are attempting it.
Yeah.
They're attempting it. So that's perhaps the best way to understand the sense of khida' or mukhada'a, rather than
when you said this mutual, that's the meaning that came to my mind as well. There's usually two people required, like muqatala, two people to fight one another.
Yeah, so there is a way of understanding that in that way. So either you see it as it's to do with a mubalagha, that is to say, like the amount of effort that they're putting in to try to do this. And it's nothing
that's what Imam Baqai says, mubalagha.
But others said, you can look at a certain mutuality, but then of course it doesn't mean they are actually fooling God, but what they are doing, the action of those who are, in their view, that's what they are doing, right? So they are doing the kind of thing that a person does when they are fooling someone, but of course they do not fool God, because then that's made clear, وَمَا يَخْدَعُونَ or وَمَا يُخَادِعُونَ إِلَّا أَنفُسَهُم. Right. So then, even then, is there mutuality? There can be.
God can we translate? They're trying to deceive God while they only deceive themselves.
Well, I did translate it that way. Yeah.
Oh, you did translate. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but that's not the only. That's not the only way to understand it. You know, you can still understand that there is a mutuality, but it's just it requires a bit more explanation.
After we have a 2-minute discussion, we conclude with Ustadh Sohaib's translation. So there is actually a lot of thought put behind this. Perhaps sometimes a few paragraphs of Ibn Mashur's translation of tafsir goes into one choice of your choosing of translating in a particular way.
Some pages and pages of discussion sometimes, yeah.
No.
So to elaborate on this part, their hearts harbor a disease. So the disease is nifaq. You know, nifaq and hypocrisy is a disease with many, symptoms, right? So this is is a powerful description of nifaq, and it's something, the comparison that he makes, Ibn Ashur makes, that when you hide the disease from the doctor, it's only going to get worse. and hiding their kufr inside means that they are not actually going, in front of the Prophet ﷺ and allowing him to treat them for their character flaws and what lies within them. They are just pretending as if it's not there. So it's only going to grow. It's only going to spread, right? Like the worst diseases known to man. So فَزَادَهُمُ اللَّهُ مَرَضًا. Again, you can look at it from the pure, taqdeer, and God has done this to them. Or you can look at it more as the expression of what has happened in the state that they have allowed themselves to end up in. So over time, their disease only grows. And that lets you know then they are not going to actually come back from this. It's like a terminal disease for them. An agonizing torment awaits them because of their denial بما كانوا يكذبون, or because of their lying بما كانوا يكذبون.
I was just going to ask, we hear about people who have changed over time, and the hypocrites became real believers, right, Ustadh Sohaib? So we have those examples as well in the Surah. So I guess, again, can we look at these verses as being specific to certain people, certain hypocrites?
That's fair. I'm not sure there's that many cases where hypocrite. I mean, so there is a discussion that Ibn Ashur gets into around Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh, but then he also finds that the narrations are not reliable. But let's say at least it's plausible that someone who was in this state of hypocrisy could come back from it, and that's why the Qur'an is also giving them this invitation and warning them against hypocrisy. So let's accept that as plausible. And then, of course, this ayah is speaking then about those who are in a sense doomed. Like the ayah before, we're talking about those unbelievers who are doomed, and not about all people who are currently in a state of unbelief. Yeah.
Yeah, I think just like the verse of the believers spoke about the best of the best, as-sabiqun al-awwalun, but an encouragement for the rest. These verses also speak about even Imam Baqai goes through each verse he goes through each name of munafiqs, and he attributes a verse of the Quran, for each one of them, like 10, 12 names. But yeah, but the general opinion that was told to me, it's maybe a safe opinion, is that the hypocrites were like ices. They all ended up melting in the great pool of Islam. It's a bit more of a peaceful image after the Prophet ﷺ. But it's it's a bit of a controversial issue. But after the Prophet, all the Sahaba, we see them as udul. We don't question them on the narration of the hadith, nor do we لا نتهم أحدا منهم. Although in Imam Thing's book, that famous Usul al-Shashi book, there's a unique quote of Sayyidina Ali saying, we have to be careful even at hadith, and then he quotes the munafiqun verses. Allahu Alam.
One interesting thing Ibn Kathir goes into is the muhajirun, the people who had migrated from Mecca to Medina. Apparently there's none of them, not that we know all the hypocrites anyway, but it says that none of them were hypocrites, since they had all accepted Islam willingly. And they went through all the hardship and difficulty. They even migrated, which was leaving their homes behind and moving to a different city, leaving their belongings, all that hardship at the time. So none of these people were hypocrites. They had declared their faith in the hardest times anyway. There were some obviously who were left behind, but we're talking about the majority here. And he quotes Ibn Jarir again and talks about hypocrites. He says that their words contradict their actions. Their secret is openness. Their entrance is their exit, and their appearance is what's in a way hidden, like so. Like everything about them
The opposite.
is about contradiction. Yeah, that's right.
Was he defining hypocrites or politics?
No, hypocrites.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
It sounded a bit like politics. Anyway.
But yeah.
Yeah, subhanAllah, like when I was first reading a bit more Islam, like you open the Quran, Surah Fatiha, Baqarah, hypocrites, Nisa, hypocrites, great portion, Ma'idah, hypocrites. Even in A'raf, you know, sometimes the people of A'raf, you can extract some sort of a thing there. But then Surah Tawbah comes, Anfal, hypocrites.
Yeah.
The first 10 juz of the Quran is like so much emphasis. And Surah Tawbah is like where they get the most.
Yeah. And they cause the most damage to Muslims and Islam. You know, we know with the battles.
Yeah.
Like and the Quran continuously warns us and makes sure that we understand these people's characteristics. Like Qatada says, his state at night is different to his state in the morning, and vice versa. And he uses the analogy of a ship for a hypocrite. They just blow in the wind, so they don't have a set direction, which is quite scary and dangerous, because that means they can do anything. But despite all this, again, like he quotes Ibn Jurayj actually, and he says that, you know, the Prophet ﷺ did not kill any of the hypocrites, right? Execute them, and you know, as long as, you know, they continued to pray and outwardly said they were Muslims. And he says this is because he didn't also want them to stop them, like, from entering Islam. So there was still an opportunity for them until their very last breath. And the Prophet ﷺ, you know, he was worried about people's hereafter. Ultimately, that's what he sent for. As difficult as it is, like I think about it myself, but he just, you know, let them be. So we know the story about even, you know, wanting to pray the janazah of Ibn Salul, to that extent. So yeah.
Yeah, I liked Ustadh Sohaib's translation. What did he say? He said, then there is those sort of people, not just someone from amongst mankind. The word an-nas, Imam Baqai says it comes from an-naus. He goes, here it's very appropriate for hypocrites, because naus, he says, it's like a string that's hanging and shaking. The wind blows it wherever it goes. And the hypocrites are a bit like that. يترددون between iman and kufr, and going from iman and unbelief, like the previous two verses. And also he connects it to the central theme of hidayah of the Quran, that hidayah is not easy, that you're seeking hidayah. The Quran talks about hidayah with the believers, but then also watch out, there's a lot of encouragement to making sure you seek purity. In verse 9, it's sort of the Quran, it's like it's highlighting the intellect, because they're trying to deceive someone who cannot be deceived. That's it's highlighting the pinnacle of the zenith of their stupidity, if that's appropriate to say. The verses in response, as if someone asks, what is their purpose of showing faith while not having it? Even they know that this is a very ugly and abhorrent thing for them. Yeah. In terms of the thing we have here, Ustaz Yusuf Wahab has got us a summary from Qurtubi's tafsir. And I was going to ask Ustaz Sohaib if that was one of the things. فَزَادَهُمُ اللَّهُ مَرَضًا. Allah increased them in sickness or in disease. Sometimes that's said in a pattern of dua. قَاتَلَهُمُ اللَّهُ. It literally translates Allah as if Allah fought with them, but may Allah curse them is the way it's translated. So here, I was going to ask, can it be said, but here it's already the view is given that some have seen it as it's a dua against them.
Yeah. It has been said, although Ibn Ashur specifically, says that he doesn't find that plausible because it's not the kind of thing that you would seek for them. You would rather that they be guided. Like there isn't really a munasabah here for saying that there should be a curse made against them. في قلوبهم مرض. And then the fa as well. The position of the fa doesn't really support that, but it definitely is a view amongst the mufassirin. Yeah.
Because fa being sababiyya, fazadahumullah.
It's more evident then that it's an atf. Something has happened after the fact of the disease in their hearts. Then God has increased them in that. That's a more evident meaning than, so may God increase them in disease.
Yeah, Imam Bukhari did not mention it as a dua as well, not that I'm aware of. And he also gives context munasabat for the different qira'at. For the yukadhibun, he says, this is the worst type of lying, to not only lie about the truth, but then to call the truthful one as a liar. And you incorporate that into your tafsir. Should we have a little break now? Maybe,
Yeah,
just a
inshallah.
5-minute break.
5 minutes, yeah. We can come 12 past the hour, inshallah. 7 past now.
12 past the hour. If we come 1 minute late, we might fall into hypocrisy. إذا وعد.
أعوذ بالله.
Not used us. I'm speaking for myself. I'm just saying the hadith about the thing when they promise.
Oh my goodness! Let's
Let's
come back.
Putting heavy weight on your shoulders, Ustadh Sohaib.
Well, talk about raising the stakes.
May Allah protect us and clean our hearts. Maybe it's a reflection. That was just a bit of a thing, connecting with the hadith.
We'll have a short break.
5 دقائق إن شاء الله.
في قلوبهم بالمناسبة يا صادق, Al-Harali is not a teacher of al-Baqarah.
Oh, really?
So Al-Harali died in 638 of the Hijrah, and al-Baqarah 885. So it's just that he used his work.
Yeah, it's like he's Umda. He constantly.
Yeah.
You don't hear one verse being. Thank you for mentioning that. I just assumed it was his teacher.
Yeah. So in my article about Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, I mentioned about al-Baqarah. That one of the key sources he draws from in his discussion is the now lost exegesis of Abu Hassan Ali ibn Ahmed al-Harali of Morocco, who has now received more scholarly attention, and I've referred there to the publications by Mahmadi al-Khayati and Faris Keswitz's thesis on al-Harali, although he calls him al-Harali. But Islam Daya also has a on him where he calls him al-Harali, which I think is right.
I mean, the Furqan.co has it with the Shadda as well. I haven't read that article of yours. I've read your Shaheen Affair article more closely, and I.
All right. Yeah, it's a quite popular one, that one.
I don't know if you remember, we exchanged a few messages a few years ago.
Was it around that?
Sorry? Yeah.
Was it about that? Okay.
It was about that. And then you connected me with someone who you said is a bit more currently dealing with the Qira'at issues. Sheikh brother living in Saudi Arabia. And we sent a chapter to him.
Oh, yes.
I think you forgot that little thing we had. That was our first sort of interactions. We're online, right? Oh, okay. Inshallah. Okay, we heard my verse, my recitation. Let's see something better.
We will go back to start. So I had recited first.
Okay.
I'll continue.
تمام تفضل.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وإذا قيل لهم لا تفسدوا في الأرض قالوا إنما نحن مصلحون ألا إنهم هم المفسدون ولكن لا يشعرون وإذا قيل لهم آمنوا كما آمن الناس قالوا أنؤمن كما آمن السفهاء ألا إنهم هم السفهاء ولكن لا يعلمون وإذا لقوا الذين آمنوا قالوا آمنا وإذا خلوا إلى شياطينهم قالوا إنا معكم إنما نحن مستهزئون الله يستهزئ بهم ويمدهم في طغيانهم يعمهون أولئك الذين اشتروا الضلالة بالهدى فما ربحت تجارتهم وما كانوا مهتدين صدق الله العظيم.
So if I share with you some translation then, even before that, I can just give you a wee glimpse of something. It's unusual to find the Mufassir draws a diagram, but in Tafsir of Ibn Ashur we actually have this diagram, and I think this is probably copied out from what he's written, not his handwriting. I've seen his handwriting, mashallah, but I don't think this is it. So here he's talking about the spiritual diseases that come from nifaq, that extend from nifaq. So he puts them into these major categories: kadhib, khawf, khida'. So that's lies, fear, and trickery, and then things that then stem out from these kind of core problems, and how those relate to the things that are mentioned in the ayat. So in the sequence of ayats, all of these things end up being touched on by the various ayat, right? So it's interesting. It's a nice diagram. It helps you to get a whole sense of the passage. But
Can you share this, Ustadh Sohaib, with us?
Inshallah, what I can do is
After maybe we can even put this up. This is amazing.
Yeah, maybe we could share in the group for those.
Yeah, there's probably a typed out version as well from another edition. Maybe I'll share that one. Could be easier. But the handwritten one is cute. I like it better. Right. So and when it was said to them, and bear in mind here, it's usually said when it is said to them, like again and again, which is possible. But Ibn Ashur is more seeing it as like it's referring to something that has happened, could happen again. And when it was said to them by some believers close to them, right, because who's going to be speaking to them? There are those who, they see what they're up to, they see the red flags, so they're telling them, don't be munafiqs, do not spread corruption on earth with your duplicitous behavior, right? So this fasad is the fasad of nifaq. It's referring to what they're up to. They reply without thought, we are only putting things right. The without thought part here, Ibn Ashur is saying, why has he made this comment? He's saying they don't even consider that maybe they are actually the problem, right? But they just unthinkingly defend themselves, right? So bear in mind that oftentimes when people quote this ayah, they're talking about other contexts, where it's valid to quote the ayah, but in the context, it is not talking about warmongering out in the earth, spreading corruption in the earth in that big macro sense. But here, the effect of what they're doing is going to have a massive effect. By opposing the messenger and the movement of truth, they are spreading evil and they are impeding good, right? And then Allah says, "Ala innahum humul mufsiduna," which I've translated like this, but see, they truly are the corruptors. Allah is calling your attention to something. It's called harf of tanbih, istiftah and tanbih. That is to say, this is emphasizing it and drawing your attention to the reality of the matter. But see, they truly are the corruptors. And being the corruptors means that they are never going to put anything right, no matter how much they think they are. Though they do not realize. So they don't realize the reality of what they are doing and the effect that it is having. And although he doesn't elaborate on this, it seems that they then are sort of assuming that what the Prophet ﷺ is calling to and the message of Islam is about is itself the form of corruption. And then what they're doing is they're trying to undermine that because they think they're actually solving a problem. But they are the spoilers and not the fixers. But they see themselves as the fixers because they see the others as the spoilers, right? But they truly are the corruptors and the spoilers, though they do not realize. And when it was said to them, believe as everyone else believes, they say, should we believe as the foolish ones believe? So Aman and Nas, of course, is not referring to all mankind, but it's referring to the people, but all the people, who's everyone else apart from you. That's the kind of implication. We know that not the whole earth were believers, but here, those around you, right? That's An-Nas here. Believe as everyone else believes. They say, should we believe as the foolish ones believe? And here they are attributing foolishness to, some of the greatest people that they could have been pointing to, right? So great minds amongst the Sahaba. They know very well that they are not fools, but they are saying this in order to support their own choice to go against it. Allah says, but see, they are the actual fools, though they do not know. So they don't know that fact, and they also don't know or understand the difference between guidance and misguidance. So what greater foolishness is there? And this is what's called jahl murakkab, right? Compound ignorance. Not only do they, not know the truth of Islam, but they don't know that the certainty that they have is based on nothing, right? The sense that they are on the right path is completely wrong because they don't actually understand the difference between truth and falsehood, guidance and misguidance. Here, who has said this latter thing to them? It could be the same people, some of the believers who had, their interests at heart and were like, come on, bro, you're on the wrong track here. Let's fix up, join the real believers. But it could also be that it was said by some of the hypocrites themselves who were fed up and tired of all this pretense, right? It's exhausting having to lie all the time and keep track of your lies. And so it could be even some of the hypocrites are saying, why don't we believe like everyone else? Why don't we just give up all this stuff that we're doing? So then the response contains a lie, as we said. So maybe I'll pause here for us to chew on these ayat.
Ustadh Sadeq maybe might touch on this, but the hadith which mentions truly in the body there is a limb. If it is sound, the whole body is sound, and if it's corrupt, then the whole body is corrupt. And then he says, "It is, verily, it is the heart." The Prophet ﷺ actually makes the connection, right, between the heart and corruption. Heart being corrupt, then the person becoming corrupt. Because the previous verse said, "Fi qulubihim marad," in their heart is sickness, and so Sohaib mentioned that it's the Mufassirs have Ibn Kathir as well says it's hypocrisy. There's other like ostentation and doubt. There's other ways of looking at it as well, as Ibn Kathir talks about. But once that is the case for a person, it results in disbelief and acting in disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in every way possible. So, and this also brings to my mind like that hadith, about the Bada al-Islam ghariban, like Islam started strange, it will continue. And then in Tirmidhi, it also captures when it talks about the strangers, الَّذِينَ يُصْلِحُونَ إِذَا أَفْسَدَ النَّاسِ, it says, right? And those who reform when everyone else is, kind of corrupting. So it ties that up in terms of this, corruption. But then, as the hypocrites here say that no, we are the reformers. So it's a strange thing how those people can call themselves reformers while they're completely on the other side of the spectrum. So,
I really liked your point about the connection of the heart and fasad. I hadn't thought of that with the hadith. I sometimes wonder today, they say they have a lot of psychologists are saying they're fearing AI might replace their role. I've been hearing because they're seeing that they can also diagnose people. I wonder if you feed into these AI machines that are trained to be psychologists, what type of psychological illnesses they'll pull out from sentences like this, that when they said, is there some sort of narcissism? Allahu alam. Maybe inshallah there might be a group of psychologists, brothers and sisters who'll be reading these verses. They can comment on that. Imam Bukhari says in terms of the munasabah that after showing their inner reality, inner mentality in the verse before, verse 11, it shows it gives an outward sign to the believers to recognize them. And that is when they're being told, prohibited from committing acts of general corruption, they claim that they're performing a general act of goodness. What's that verse of the Qur'an? Ustadh Sohaib might be able to say it. It's very difficult to talk about the Qur'an when like myself, when you're not hafiz of the Qur'an. It says when they said to fear Allah, أخذتهم العزة.
وإذا قيل له اتق الله أخذته العزة بالإثم. Yeah,
when they're told to fear Allah, the arrogance overtakes them, and that takes them towards sin, right? It sometimes, for some reason, it reminds me of this verse, because at the moment they're saying don't corrupt, instead of saying we're not the corruptors, they say no, إنما نحن مصلحون, like we are the only ones that are doing good, as if, Again, Imam, to continue with Imam Bukhari, in verse 12, he puts the munasabat that he's saying, why is there more information being given? It's because he connects it to the hadith that a believer, al-mu'minu ghirrun karimun wal-kafiru khibbun na'imun, that a believer is an honorable person that can be easily deceived. This is my rough translation. It's probably bad choice of words. Whilst a disbeliever, I think the hadith says kafir, but there might be fajir as well. But the disbeliever is intelligent yet debased person, very witty, very smart. So because of the attribute of believers sometimes falling easily for them, the Quran is warning them here that they're the only ones that are causing the corruption. And the way it says, Allah innahum mufsidun, as if their corruption compared to all other corruption stands to nothing. They're the true corruptors.
Just on the Surah Sadeq, just what I had quoted earlier from I think it was Ibn Jarir. Remember we were saying the words contradict their action. The secret is openness, etc. So everything is really switched around for them. It's the opposite. So that I've just been thinking as we are speaking, like, they don't just say no, we're not, but they completely argue for the other side, right? Yeah. So it makes sense for a hypocrite to do this. They are arguing the complete opposite because they need to show themselves as the opposite, perhaps. But yeah, I just wanted to share that as you. Yeah.
Even like the type of punishment is from the type of sin, right? Even in Surah Hadid, it talks about in the hereafter, they'll be seeing a wall where the inner of it is merciful, but outside of it is punishment. Mm-hmm. It's like a double-faced wall, like the nature of the hypocrites. And that's the type of thing they'll be seeing. Allah. Here Imam Bukhari says in relation to verse 12, that the la put together, la yash'urun, it means mustaqbal, if I'm not mistaken, if I understood that. Mind you, sometimes, as you can see from my messages, sometimes Imam Bukhari have difficulty in fully grasping him. As Ustadh Sohaib mentioned, to believe like the people have believed. He quotes his, not teacher, but like his tafsir source that Ustadh Sohaib mentioned, Shaykh al-Harrali. He says that when Iman is attributed to people, Imanun nas kama amana nas, it's one of the lowest forms of faith. But even that, they somehow, they're not able to accomplish.
So do you mean that in a way he's saying he's not even they're not even calling them just like believe like the elite, believe like the prophets, believe like the angels. They just believe like the people. At least have the baseline level of Iman ordinary people have, and even that they refuse to do, right? Because maybe.
Yeah. He says here from Harrali, he says, wal iman al mudaf ila nas adna maratib al iman. It reminds me a bit of Pharaoh, he doesn't say, I believe in the Lord of Musa and Harun, like the magicians say. Instead, he says, I believe in the Lord of Banu Israel.
Yeah.
I mean, their faith was already questionable. If only he said, I believed in the Lord of Moses and Harun. Yeah, so that sort of iman connected to that, that's what he quotes Shaykh Harrali, connecting that. In verse 14, he's very big on this jumla ismiya, jumla fi'aliyah, and he extrapolates a lot of meanings based on that. So when they meet the people who believe, did we cover that verse?
13 or 14? No,
we're about to.
Have you covered? No, you haven't covered that, huh?
Not yet.
Okay. How about I cover it after you cover it?
Okay.
One thing I was just going to mention, there is hypocrisy by deed and then there's hypocrisy by belief. Right? So we're talking about hypocrites here, those hypocrisy by belief, those people who say we believe but they don't believe. Personally, when I was reading these verses, it was a bit heavy on me, and alhamdulillah, we are believers, but this hypocrisy is something that bites us as well, inshallah, not by belief, but by action. And when, I guess, Ibn talks about the hypocrite, it says it's the corruption in it means disbelief, but then disobedience as well in action. So something that perhaps we could take away from here is the hypocrisy by amal, by action, is something that we all need to keep in mind at all times.
Yeah, I like that. Sometimes when the Quran talks about, like the 2 verses we read about kufr, it's clear it's kufr al-iman, they're denying faith. But sometimes when we read it, we can subjectively read it. Oh, what about our kufran ni'mah? This, like not giving thanks to the blessings, that's also called kufr. And also nifaq, we can see it from the ostentation perspective. That's how ultimately Quran should be read, as if it's addressing us. Like Sayyidina Umar went to the companion, what was his name? Not Hanzala. Hanzala's the one who said nafaqa Hanzala. The other, the one who knew the names of the hypocrites.
Hudayfa.
Hudayfa al-Yamani. No. When he said, at least let me know if I'm one of them, and he said, you're not, ya Amir al-Mu'minin. That's ultimately how we need to look at these verses. The verse 11 from Qurtubi's tafsir has been mentioned, that there's this sense that the earth was corrupted, and then after the coming of Islam, it was put back to order, and then the hypocrites and their sinning is corrupting the earth again. So there's this, like the hadith you quoted, الَّذِينَ يُفْسِدُونَ مَا أَصْلَحُ النَّاسُ. الَّذِينَ يُصْلِحُونَ مَا أَفْسَدَهُ النَّاسُ. The people that fix what others corrupt.
Yeah, and in the Araf verse 56 as well, وَلَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ بَعْدَ إِصْلَاحِهَا.
Yeah, there it says it more explicitly, after its islah.
So perhaps we can see the next ayahs to open a discussion around that. وَإِذَا لَقُوا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, when they meet those who believe, they say, we are believers. When they go back to being alone with their devils, they say, we're actually with you, we're only mocking. So when they meet those who believe, there's a very nice subtlety which you can perhaps pick up, even the translation, in the sense of meeting, إِذَا لَقُوا, and then خَلَوْا إِلَى شَيَاطِينِهِمْ. So خَلَوْا إِلَى sort of combines 2 ideas. Khala means to be alone with, but the ila implies they go back to. So they go back to being alone. So the translation here is trying to get both of those parts. That is to say, like their home, their natural home is with their shayateen. And they will meet occasionally with the believers in their gatherings, right? They will be in the company of the Prophet ﷺ or wherever the believers are. So when they meet those who believe, they say, Amanna, of course, literally, we have believed, or we do believe. But the point in the way they're saying it is like, we are like you, right? We belong to you. Amanna is in that kind of sense, right? We have this identity with you. So we are believers. And they may say that out loud, or it means they do all the things and say all the things like Muslims do in order to pass off as believers, right? So we are believers like you. But when they go back to being alone with their devils, who are the leaders of the hypocrites, they say, we're actually with you. We're only mocking. And what's interesting here is Ibn Ashur goes into, like al-Baqarah likes to do, of course, the construction and the implication. Why is the latter statement quite emphatic? Inna ma'akum, innama nahnu mustahzi'un. Whereas before, amanna was given without any particular emphasis, right? You might think that actually you've got to put more emphasis when you are pretending amongst the believers. But he suggests that we should understand here that when they are with the believers, they don't want to be too emphatic. They're kind of being smart about it. It's like, we're believers. Hello, fellow believers. Like the meme, right? So, how are you doing, fellow believers? So they're trying to keep it cool. But then, oddly enough, when they're back with their shayateen, it's almost like they're fellow hypocrites. are looking at them and saying, "You're a bit too convincing over there. Are you sure you're not actually a believer?" So these are people who are so given to lies that they become suspicious of each other, right? In the ironic way, they don't have a clean-hearted relationship with each other as the believers do. But instead, they're the ones who are constantly cynical and second-guessing themselves and each other. So they have to then say, no, we are. No, I'm just a really good actor. I'm actually a hypocrite like you, right? I'm actually a kafir like you. So ironically, they have to...
You can see them trying their best to convince their shayateen that, hey, I'm on your side. And you can see that's a really good point, the doubts. In Surah Tawbah, I know this off topic, on this side of the verse it says, Al-mu'minuna awliya'u ba'duhum min ba'd. And then the next page it says, Al-munafiquna ba'duhum min ba'd. It doesn't use the word awliya. And because I remember reading somewhere, it says, because there is no friendship amongst hypocrites. They're always suspicious of one another. They're always... So this verse, what you just pointed, Ibn Ashur, really remind me of that. It's good we're taking out the psychology of this. Sorry.
Yeah, and subhanAllah, what's amazing is that's contained within the words and the choice of the words, these subtleties. But you have to ponder on them to see that. So when they say we are only mocking them, that is to say the believers, then the next ayah comes with this defense of the believers. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not happy to leave them with this claim that we are mocking. Allah is going to defend in Allah yudafi'un anil ladhina amanu, right? So it is God who mocks them. And some understand this to be like a statement about the future, that he will mock them on Judgment Day. But perhaps a clearer meaning is the first. It is God who mocks them and turns their plot against them. This is to explain the idea of mocking them, to defend the believers, and allows them more slack to wander blindly in their insolence, in their unique form of insolence and evil doing. So the second part of the ayah clarifies the first part of the ayah, because istihza, as mocking, is not something that we would normally think that is a befitting description or action to attribute to God. But contextually, it is attributed to God. And in what's called mushakala, that is where an action is stated from some evildoers, and then God does something in response to them, and the same word is used in a different way. Right? So in the sense that God is mocking them, that is to say, he is turning their attempts against them and making a mockery of them, such that the believers then can in a way laugh at what they have done, and even in the hereafter, the believers will look على الأرائك ينظرون فاليوم الذين آمنوا من الكفار يضحكون, right? So they are going to laugh. The believers will laugh at those who had tormented them. So it's about the turn.
وَمَكَرُوا وَمَكَرَ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ.
اللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ, as will come to. So or that's in Ali Imran, right? So the case is that it's not that God would normally be said to be doing makr, which is plotting, because why would God need to plot and think about something and to come up with a plan? He doesn't need to. But it is an expression which matches and contrasts with what they are doing, right? So you can also see that God turns their plot against them and God enacts his plan, right? So that's a way of just making sense of this theologically. And then the ayah itself says, and allows them more slack to wander blindly. So that in itself is the expression of the mockery that they are under. They think they're getting away with it. They think that the believers are fooled. They even think that God is pleased with them and that's why they're okay. They think that their idols are actually helping them against God. But their time is coming. Maybe I
really like how you said he allows them more slack. I like that translation of Yamudduhum.
Yeah, I think that maybe I maybe used I borrowed Professor Abdul Halim on that one, to give credit where it's due. There are some expressions which are, which sometimes you find that earlier translators did a nice job, so we can make use of.
Sometimes when people go rock climbing, the sport rock climbing, they want some more slack. More slack means just give me some more. Don't make the rope too tight. If you
Right.
really make it if you give them too much slack, they can fall to the ground. So sometimes giving comfort and slack, it has that other connotation.
Yeah, so he's
Yeah.
supplying them. He's supplying them some freedom to go and do what they do, but he is still, the rope is still there, essentially, in this image,
Yeah.
where when
Yeah.
he wills, they will be yanked back.
Just with your point, just so I don't forget about the mushakala, that's a really, it's like a balagha type principle that Allah, I've heard it. I was once studying with the Turkish, and he was very critical of the Turkish translations of the Quran, and he's very sensitive on these type of words. So he didn't like it when the Turkish translations quotes this mushakala for God. So his preference for the translation used to be like they were mocking, and Allah also responded to their mockery, or muqabalada bulundu. I don't know how to translate that in English. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala somehow reciprocated. Because it's very careful. Sometimes some people are very from a very high thing, but the principle is based on what you're saying. It's this mushakala.
Absolutely, yeah. But so I think sometimes these things I would be wary about trying to be more, like, as I say, there's an expression in Arabic where they say "Malikiyya akthar min al-malik," right? So to be more royal than the king himself, right? So a literal translation should not be taken literally, but the translation sometimes just gives you the sense literally, and then you're supposed to understand it correctly. God did not find it inappropriate to say in Arabic, "Allahu yastahzi'u bihim," and it has a direct meaning and direct, impression that is formed, which then you modify that impression to understand it correctly. But that's a point of view about what the translator's role is. But to, in a sense, sanitize or sunnatize or ash'arize the translation,
in this case you have to say maturidize.
Or maturidize, just to be fair, but sunnatize is the catch-all word, right? So it's like sanitization, but making it sunni, right? So yes, we should understand it correctly, and translation can help with that. But we should recognize that in the Arabic text, certain expressions are used, which, if you're not using a translation, you still have to understand them correctly.
Yeah, it was just from that angle. Like, for example, the min bab, like Sayyidina Imam Abu Hanifa said, Yadullah should not be translated in Farsi as Dast Khuda, as the hand of God. He says this in Fiqh al-Akbar. I know that book is contested whether it goes back to him or not, but in some words he says, because it doesn't carry all the majazi and other meanings of Arabic in the new languages. I mean, you're the expert in translation, Ustadh. Just from that angle, perhaps you were saying, perhaps the Arabic has the subtleties that it sounds a bit more harsher in the Turkish, or somewhat not appropriate. But you're right. Sometimes you have to take it with a grain of salt.
I think so. So it's kind of goes back to the question of, like, should we attempt translation at all? If we decided that we want to attempt it, then we may as well commit to it as much as possible, and recognize the limitations of certain words and the need to supply some more information, so that things are not taken too simplistically or too much at face value. See the majaz in these things, face value. So English has that flexibility as well, right?
Should we? I just have a few points to mention about. Or did you want to continue to 16? Maybe I'll mention.
Well, just because it's just literally just the one ayah. So maybe if I quote that, and then we can have the discussion around what remains. So such are those who have bought error in exchange for guidance. And there's two senses of that. One is preferring the former to the latter, preferring error over guidance. That can be what the ishtira here implies. Or also, like, every time that they come back to their devils, they cast off the guidance, which was the outward garment that they're wearing amongst the believers, and replace it with the garments of kufr and nifaq. So their trade reaps no profit, and they are not rightly guided. So that's just in terms of the translation of the the last ayah that we're looking at today.
Nice. It's really good that you've put it in bold, the actual Quran bits and the non-bold bits. And I like your side notes as well. May Allah reward you, Ustadh. Ustadh Ahmed?
You can mention a few things after you, perhaps.
Okay. I'll just go quickly what Imam Bukhari says. Very similar point you said about in verse 14, when they said to when they meet when they meet the people who believe, they say amanna, and the way he argues this, that it's less emphatic compared to what they say to the shayateen, inna ma'akum, is because of the verbal sentence that's used. Verbal sentence in Arabic have some sort of a less amount of emphasis or certainty, but when they meet their shayateen, they say inna ma'akum, we are with you. So that's how he points to it. And shaitan was translated by Shaykh al-Hallali as anyone that is very far away from any good. And then now he extracts another meaning by using the verbal sentence in the next verse, Allahu yastahzi bihim. Here it says, because it's not so absolute and definite as Jumla Ismiya, it opens the door that for those who repent sincerely amongst them, then Allah will forgive them. It's not like this is the way Allah will deal with them with no change, So that was I thought that was a nice, interesting thing. And the word al-ama, Shaykh al-Harrali defines it as a state when matters from which good can be derived from, when they're confused and mixed up after the losses of the senses. I translate that really bad. So once you've lost your sense, you can't sense anything. There are dalalat that you can derive good from, but even that they're confused in. So it really implies that there's no hope for them to find the right way. And finally, he says that when all the above has taken place, the summary of all this is that they persisted in desires and forced themselves to act in ways against the fitrah, the primordial way that God has set for them, to the point that they exchanged the worst things, dalala, in place for guidance. So they not only did not profit, but they lost the initial capital, Ra'sul Mal, which was Hidayah. So they're left with nothing but dalala in their hands. These are some of the points I had from.
Yeah. And Ibn Kathir quotes Ibn Abbas, he says, they took misguidance and left behind guidance. I guess these are the kind of discussions we've been having anyway. But the verse from Surah Fussilat, which is وَأَمَّا ثَمُودُ فَهَدَيْنَاهُمْ فَاسْتَحَبُّوا الْعَمَىٰ عَلَى الْهُدَىٰ. So as for Thamud, we showed them guidance, but then they preferred blindness over guidance. Once again, it really goes back to discussions about Allah sealing their hearts, and فَلَمَّا زَاغُوا.
What surah was that? فَاسْتَحَبُّوا الْعَمَىٰ.
Fussilat, verse number 17. And Qatada says that you saw them go from guidance to misguidance, from unity to disunity, from security to fee, from the sunnah to heresy, and so on. And you kind of touched on how the believers are friends and protectors of one another, but the verse that you mentioned, and the hypocrites are actually they are one of another. So really not, I guess there's no unity. There is some sort of fee in them all the time, of perhaps being disclosed, or their actions, being there, who they are really being revealed. So, but ultimately it comes down to them making the choice of choosing misguidance.
Yeah, that يستحبون العمى is another verse of the Quran that shows the love of the world. The word istihbab has been used, which sort of implies, I read somewhere, that they knowingly, despite knowing the fleeting nature of this world, they cling to it and love it. I wonder if the same thing can be mentioned here, because shira or ishtira, or the trade, you usually know what you're trading. So there's sort of some consciousness. Allah.
And of course, all this is happening while these people are with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there's the sun there, and unfortunately, they choose to turn away from the sun. Which, when you think about it, like Ibn Kathir, when he talks about Allah's mockery, Hasha, and I guess he says that it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't muck around, like he doesn't mock. His mockery is taking revenge and responding with justice and reprimanding. So whether it's in this world or we know in the hereafter, definitely. But that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deals with these things. It's not taken lightly.
Yeah. I mean, we normally hear the good examples. Ana inda dhanni abdin bi. I deal with my servant how he thinks of me. Just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deals with us how we think of him. This muqabala that Ustadh Sohaib was talking about, or mushakala, he said. You find here, Allah mocks them. Ustadh Yusuf has written here from Qurtubi, the punishment is given the same name of the sin. It is a customary usage in the Arabic language. Being mocked by Allah means to be given plenty of blessings that make you think He is pleased with you, that makes you think He's pleased with you. And some scholars have interpreted the verse, we will progressively lead them from where they do not know, al-istidraj, I think it's used, to mean every time they invent a new sin, a new blessing will be given to them.
To keep them going.
Yeah, on the weekend I was reading with someone some verses from the Mathnawi of Jalaluddin Rumi. It says there, obviously, I don't know the authenticity, but Pharaoh never had a single headache in his life. He was always constantly surrounded in blessings like that, so that he could never say, oh Allah, call to Allah to heal me. I have a question for both of you. So if Surah Fatiha is the believers, anamta alayhim, and then there's ghayr al-maghdubi alayhim, and then wal ad-dallin, and we said these three categories, believers, 2 verses of kuffar, and then a lengthy explanation of the munafiqs. I don't want to be too thin on my theory, because wal ad-dallin is the more dangerous, and Ustadh Sohaib last week said fihi nadar, but the length of the wal ad-dallin sort of matches the length of these 12, 13 verses, like, can we say it's wal ad-dallin, there's some sort of a mirroring, a parallel between the ad-dallin and the hypocrites, and maghduba alayhim and the kuffar and the believers, or no? That was question one. My second question was, Surah Waqi and Surah Rahman also speaks of 3 categories, but in those 3 categories, 2 of them are good. As-sabiqun, as-sabiqun, thumma ashabul yamin, wa ashabul shimal. But here, 2 of them are bad in Surah Fatiha and Baqarah, while 1 of them are only good. Any thoughts on that?
So, I mean, we touched on the fact that Imam al-Razi gives this idea, this suggestion that you mentioned. But generally, the Mufassirun are not happy with this alternative view, that maybe the 3 categories in the Fatiha correspond to the 3 categories in al-Baqarah. The main reason being that there is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that identifies the Maghdub alayhim al-Dallin as the Jews and the Christians respectively. So they don't want to go away from that, although it is possible to say that 2 perspectives can be true in their own way. We don't have to take the Prophet's statement sallallahu alaihi wasallam as being the only way that the ayahs give meaning. But Imam al-Razi then, as far as I can see, doesn't elaborate on how these descriptions correspond, because al-Maghduba alayhim as the kuffar, that's not difficult to understand. Why are the munafiqun called ad-dallin according to that theory? That's not so clear. And how that contrasts with the state of the outward unbelievers and idolaters. But it's not impossible to make a case for it. I just don't think that the Mufassirun generally didn't make the case for it for various reasons. In regard to the Waqi'ah question, I don't know. That's an interesting thing to ponder. I don't know if Ustadh Ahmed might have a thought about it.
Maybe the Meccan surahs, and like you said, in Mecca there was no nifaq. Allahu Alam, but
I mean, it's talking about a situation in the hereafter, so it's a different conversation. But still, there might be something more to the question.
Yeah, because in Surah Rahman it talks about the people of hellfire first, and then no, actually in Surah Rahman it's just people of hellfire and then the believers, but then they're given وَمِن دُونِهِمَا جَنَّتَانِ, then they're given another 2 gardens. It's not a different category. It's really extra blessings.
Well, there are different views as to whether these are maybe for different categories of people.
True, maybe there could be that.
That is a view, but then some said, وَمِن دُونِهِمَا جَنَّتَانِ is for another category who are less than the preceding category, and some said it's for another category who are better than the preceding category. Whereas personally, I think it is neither of those things. but we're not studying Surah Al-Rahman just now.
Inshallah, if we get up to that, we'll love to hear those views. Inshallah.
Oh, it's a crazy view. We're gonna have to.
I have a view on that verse as well, but I'll first try to see if anyone else supports it.
All right, we'll talk about it offline, inshallah.
Inshallah, when we get to it. Okay, so next week we'll do the next. Plan is to do the next 2 pages. I mean, it was good we did 1 page only. I don't think we would have finished these 2 pages tonight. Inshallah. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. See you next week, Ustadh Sohaib. See you, everyone. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.